Self Knowing Others podcast, the fortnightly podcast that explores self awareness, leader effectiveness, and leadership at all levels. Join me, your host, Nia Thomas, as we talk to today's Knowing Self, Knowing Others guest. Aluson Smith, it's absolutely lovely to speak to you, and it's the first time we've actually had a conversation. We've certainly followed each other and had lots of chats on LinkedIn. And one of the ways that I've certainly got to know you was through your book. So, for listeners who don't know of your book, it's called Can't See the Wood for the Trees, Landscaping Your Life to Get Back on Track, and they can find it on Amazon.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself in a minute, and I would like you to tell listeners a bit about your book because your model of coaching is really unique, and I'd never heard of anything quite similar, and I thought it was just brilliant. So,
Well,
Alison
thank you.
Smith, it's fabulous to have you here. Please do introduce yourself and tell us more about your book.
I suppose, a coach trainer. I would suggest it's within mindset, creative thinking, problem solving would be where my speciality is.
Hmm.
A lot of it still, 37 years after leaving university, is within the procurement arena. But as you say, I've written a book, I podcast, I write in LinkedIn, and it's sort of aimed at a broader market. I've got various programs coming up aimed beyond procurement. But if you go on LinkedIn, you'll find me obviously also talking all things procurement. In
Wonderful.
terms of the book, I think, and it sort of relates actually to the topic that we're going to be talking about in terms of, I suppose, how did my own self-awareness emerge? And I did an NLP, neuro linguistic programming course back in 2000,
Amazing.
and I suppose I just absorbed everything they were telling. And what I also found was metaphor was such powerful for me personally that I'm a bit of a resistant. Um, I'm a mismatcher. It would be the language. So you say white and I'll say black. So trying to solve problems with me, trying to get me to accept the perhaps giving me feedback's not great.
Mhm.
So in some respects, I found tools that helped me bypassed my logical mind that was quite resistant to hearing what everybody else had to say,
Uh-huh.
and and then found that the tools that helped me solve problems and get along much better in the world also helped other people. And and I think the reason that metaphor works is that I say we send logic on a holiday. The fact that logic, if we're talking about problems, then logic might say, "Oh, let me tell you all about my problem, and I'll give you all the information about the problem and justify why I'm stuck, why there is no different way to see this situation, and of course I'm stuck and I'm right."
Uh-huh.
Once you put logic to one side and go, well, what does that look like metaphorically? Then you start talking patterns. And that takes me back to university. I did statistical analysis. So I think there's the pattern recognition that you can then see that said, oh, okay, I'm always resistant in these circumstances. And
Fascinating.
having played around with metaphors for 20 years, the book arose from when I suddenly realized in coaching sessions that people were delivering me on a plate metaphors in their language when they were stuck. So I can't see the wood for the trees. I'm stuck in a rut. I'm going around in circles. And what I realized was that, oh, okay, but that metaphor not only describes how they're stuck, it also gives you a clue to finding the solution. So I can't see the wood for the trees. I can't see the wood for the trees. Logically, I'm stuck. Oh, but metaphorically, but what would you do in a real wood? Follow a path. I'd cut the trees down. I'd go to a higher vantage point to be able to see the whole wood. I'd get out of the wood. And suddenly you end up with a whole range of options, which if you then say all of those range of options are available to you in your stuck situation, then suddenly what the solution that was hidden previously emerges and people find different ways of seeing their situation really.
Absolutely fascinating. And I've really enjoyed the book. And it makes so much sense to see your problem from a different perspective and see
Yeah,
it
yeah.
from a perspective where you can imagine a change. So I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So if we have any listeners who are a bit stuck in their world at the moment, then please do pick up a copy of the book.
Gorgeous.
So with that, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I will be very interested to hear how you approach the answers based on your experience and your view of the world. How do you define self awareness?
That's such an odd question, isn't it? I suppose for me, there's a difference between conscious awareness and unconscious awareness.
Mm,
So I think for me, self awareness is when we become consciously aware of who we are as a person, of what
ah,
motivates us, why we do what we do, and how we're different from other people. So, how is my experience of the world different than somebody else's experience of the world, and what works for them and what motivates them? But it is the conscious awareness of it rather than blindly. I always described my self awareness emerging when I got divorced. And in the book, I say that it felt like I was a bit of a pig in shit
mm,
in terms of I didn't know what I didn't know.
yeah.
And self-awareness to me is suddenly realizing there is so much more to know about me. I
Ah,
just thought
okay.
I just experienced and reacted to the world with no awareness of who I was. And therefore, self-awareness, I suppose, is the conscious awareness. It's the lifting of the veil. So, oh my God, all of that is me, and I have a choice about it. So I suppose there's also something around a choice of how I behave, rather
Mm.
than it being this is me and this is how I am, and there is no other way of me acting in the world other than like that.
What an interesting view. So both situational and environmental, I guess. All of
Yeah,
that changes your awareness of yourself.
absolutely.
Do you think there is a relationship between self-awareness and leader effectiveness?
Oh yes. Oh, definitely. The and I think that's why I was saying about the fact that within procurement, this is what I'm doing all the time. That most of the soft skills, mindset, stakeholder engagement workshops that I do really start with questions about helping people become more self-aware,
Interesting.
because I don't know that I can teach, and therefore I think it's the same for leadership. I don't know that you can teach effective communication, effective relationship building, without there being an element of you understanding yourself first, because otherwise
Mhm.
you go into a communication with somebody not realizing how much of you're sort of mirroring onto the other and thinking, well, this works for me, therefore it will work for them.
Yeah.
So it took me a while to realize that, oh, why am I asking that question at the beginning of the workshop? Like, for instance, why do you resist change? And people come up with this because people in stakeholder engagement workshops come in really, it's the stakeholders, they're awkward, they're, resistant,
Mm-hmm.
it's their fault, and they're pushing responsibility onto the other person. And by asking the question, why do you resist change? People come up with a lovely list. And then I go, so they're all the reasons you resist change. Uh-huh. So they're all the same reasons why somebody else resists change. And therefore, your communication then needs to take account of all of those reasons why somebody might be resisting you. So I realize that it's sort of taking people, even with that simple question, on a journey of their own self-awareness in order to, be more effective, whether it's in leadership, communication, or whatever it is else they're doing.
Wow, that's fascinating. And it's very interesting that you say that. The number of times that I've thought about different ways of working, different aspects of the work we do, what we do, how we do it starts with self-awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm a bit of a bore in LinkedIn where people will go on about, what do you think the greatest leadership challenge is? And I'll go, self-awareness. Oh, what do you think the first communication skill is? Self-awareness.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you all the way there. Do you think effective leaders can be found at all levels of organizations?
Yes.
Okay. What does that mean and what does that look like for you?
I think for me, it's about inspiring others to either be better themselves, to inspire change, inspire action, and therefore, absolutely, you can. Actually, I was on the phone call to somebody really annoyed today on about my bank,
Uh-huh.
but but the question he asked me in response to my frustration absolutely took all that frustration out, and I just thought,
Mm.
and I actually articulated it and said that was a great question.
Oh, tell us
That
the
was a great
question.
question. Now, it could be that it's on a script somewhere about this is what you do, but
Yeah.
I think there was an element of, yeah, that inspired and it facilitated change in me just in the one question.
Are you able to share that question
I
with
can't
us?
remember whether I can't remember whether I can remember now, but it was, yeah, I can't remember it. It's sort of gone. I can remember the experience the question left me with, and perhaps that's where
Ah,
that leadership comes from. That we don't necessarily have to remember the words, but we remember the how we felt as a result
yeah.
at the receiving end of that behaviour.
Yeah, there's a quote that you often see on LinkedIn saying you often forget what people did, but you'll never forget how people made you feel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's the case in point. Do you think leaders at the most strategic level of organizations have greater self-awareness than leaders at other levels of organization?
Oh, that's such a hard one.
It
Because
is.
because you can go one of two ways on it. I One of them is, I can think of a lot of instances where that's absolutely clearly not true, and
Uh-huh.
senior leaders are oblivious to their actions and who they are.
Yeah.
Um, but I wonder whether that's just because they're the ones we see actions of more frequently, and
Okay.
therefore, in my experience as a coach, then people are self-aware, they're not self-aware. I don't know whether or not their position in the organization differs. So the answer to that would be, I don't know that leaders are any more or less self-aware. Certain behaviors that got them where they
Hmm.
got to.
Yeah.
One of the things I talk about is taking our humanity into business. So the other thing about my filters is the fact that I'm much more likely to either notice leaders who are absolutely bringing their humanity in, and
Hmm.
therefore I would suggest very self-aware, or I'm really noticing those leaders that don't bring the humanity in, and I would suggest quite often are not very self-aware.
So do you think that their portrayal of self-awareness changes based on which whether they have a mask on or whether whether they're in front of the crowd of 150 managers or whether they're in an office having a one-to-one with you? Do you think that changes how they display that?
This is one of those times where I'll say something and let's explore that. My sense is the more self-aware you become, the more layers are removed.
Okay.
Because as you become more self-aware, you realize that who you are. So I wrote a poem about I reclaim all my parts. And there's
Mm.
an element of, perhaps as we become more self-aware, we own and accept all of our parts, whether they're parts that we love or don't love,
Hmm.
but we bring them all because that makes us who we are.
Yeah.
So I can say, oh, I can be a bit excitable and, loud. And I could either deny that or accept that. And in some respects, in its denial, I'm not self-aware.
Yeah.
And I'm also then putting that barrier between me and other people because they know
Uh-huh.
that I'm not me.
Okay.
Because there's an element of, and this is my experience, there'll be some people that I'm still, Marmite to. But my experience is my excitability. So in some of the workshops at the moment, especially when it's, no, I can't see anybody, I have to provide my own hypiness to get through 3 hours of training. Yeah.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it can be a bit much. But
Hmm.
I also know that people accept that because there's an element of they absolutely know it's not coming with um it's not planned, it's not manipulated, it's just pure me. And
Okay.
therefore people will join me in my excitement of people telling me weird things that they buy for the organization, and I just get giggle. And they don't, and I don't think it annoys people as much because it's, yeah, that's her.
So
That's
there's
what makes her a good
something.
trainer. That's who she is. So I think there's an element of the more self-aware we are, the more accepting we become of all of our parts. So the poems about loving, the parts that we deny, the ones we don't like. It's like we are all of that.
So self-awareness, being genuine, being authentic, all of those things, and your acceptance or awareness of yourself, the layers that you peel away or that you put on will change depending on your given situation.
Yeah, I think so. Because I think you've got more choice then about, oh, I always feel as if I have to act in this particular way when I'm in
Hmm.
business.
Yeah.
Business looks like this, um, which I fight against.
I suppose you limit your options by doing that.
Well, I think so, but I think there's a lot of people there that go, how often do we see in LinkedIn? Oh, that's for Facebook. It's like, but
Yeah, yeah,
that's how people, that's how you and I are even here talking. It
absolutely.
won't it won't have been from a business statement. It'll have just been an engagement at a heart to heart level that
Hmm.
has led to that, over the months, years, that building up of that relationship, such
Yeah.
that you know who I am, I know who you are, um, and I don't know that we've got it wrong, if that makes sense, because we're
Hmm.
both turning up and being us rather
Yeah.
than turning up and going, this is who I think I should be when I'm in LinkedIn.
Do you think effective leaders have more self-awareness than ineffective leaders?
I would say so.
What
Yeah.
example do you have? I guess that you've worked in the world of work for many years. Have you had any examples where you've seen that effective leadership, ineffective leadership, and that
Yeah. I mean,
difference in self-awareness?
coaching client, last year where w- came with a problem and I hadn't appreciated the impact their behavior was having on the problem.
Yeah.
And was
Okay.
causing the problem. It's like, oh my God, that is why they are reacting to me like that. That's why I'm not getting the best out of them because I'm not communicating effectively to them. Half of what he was saying was in his head, and he was assuming that they understood what he meant.
Right.
They were just observing his behavior and therefore were actually making a whole host of judgments about what the few words he was saying plus behavior, and we're
Uh-huh.
making a whole load of judgments. Once that self-awareness increased because I was able to help him look at his own behavior and go,
Hmm.
so how, if you were at the receiving end of that behavior, how would you, where would your head go? And then for work with, oh, okay, so this is how I could behave differently that would facilitate a different reaction from the other person. And so on a couple of occasions, um, in both instances, he actually went and spoke to the other people involved to say, look, this is what I think's going on. Can we have a conversation? And in both instances came up with very different action plans based on a awareness that he had
Yeah.
about, oh, it's me. It's how I
Mm.
am seeing the world, how I'm going about the world. People are misinterpreting.
That is really exciting to hear because one of the things that I picked up from my research was that for me, self awareness has got three layers. So it's internal self-awareness, internal social self-awareness, and external social
Oh,
self-awareness.
lovely.
And they are reflection, recognition, and then that outer layer of responding. And you've just absolutely described it in practice. It's that I get me, I get what
Yeah,
people think of me. And if I change how I behave and I communicate, I change the response to me and
yeah,
change the
yeah,
response to the problem and the action plan or
yeah.
whatever goes with it. And it absolutely, that is all about self awareness.
Yeah, there's one of the presuppositions of neurolinguistic programming is the meaning of the communication is the response that you get, and that's hard because
Yeah,
they're misunderstanding you because you're not communicating in a way that they understand. It's not their problem. They're not awkward. They're not resistant. You're just not communicating in a way that has yet motivated them.
communication is in the eye of the beholder.
Yes.
Definitely. Alison, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. Really, really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today. You mentioned you had a podcast. Do you want to give a shout out to your podcast
Oh, that
before
would
we
be
go?
lovely.
Absolutely.
Landscaping Your Life. So you'll find me here, there, and everywhere. Landscaping Your Life will find the book, even though the books can't see the wood for the trees. It's Can't See the Wood for the Trees, Landscaping Your Life. So if you do Landscaping Your Life on any of the book stockists, you'll find it quicker actually than Can't See the Wood for the Trees. And yeah, on any podcast, Can't See the Wood for the Trees will find, you'll find me.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'll certainly be tuning in, and I hope listeners will be as well. Alison, thank you once again. It's been great.
Thanks, Nia.
Thank you for joining me, your host, Nia Thomas, at the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast. If you'd like to know more about self awareness, leader effectiveness, and leadership at all levels, please take a look at my website, knowingselfknowingothers.co.uk. You can also join me on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Make sure you bookmark the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast and tune into the next episode in 2 weeks' time. I look forward to having you on my learning journey. If you'd like to join me as a guest on the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, please drop me a line at info@knowingselfknowingothers.co.uk. If you'd like to advertise your podcast, book, or company connected to self-awareness, leader effectiveness, or leadership at all levels, please drop me a line at the same email. Please remember to bookmark the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast so that you can keep up to date with all new episodes. Remember to rate this podcast on whichever directory you listen. Knowing Self, Knowing Others is available to listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podcast Index, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, Pocket Casts, Deezer, Listen Notes, Player FM.